They said she was in the wrong room again. That's what the young staff sergeant muttered under his breath as he walked past her in the hallway of the Joint Readiness Center, shaking his head like she was nothing more than a lost intern wandering too close to power. Another junior assistant trying to look important, he scoffed. But he didn't know, none of them did, that the slim encrypted case resting in her hand carried an authority that could shut down the entire building with a single biometric press. Before we go any further, tell me where you're watching from, because this story reaches from quiet hallways to the highest levels of command, and if you agree that respect should be earned, not assumed, then like and subscribe while this unfolds. Because what happened on that gray Tuesday morning, when a 28-year-old woman stood alone outside a sealed briefing room, was the kind of lesson the military rarely forgets. Her name was Captain Leah Morgan, though no one at the base knew that yet. They saw only a young face, a calm posture, and a badge she kept tucked close to her chest, the kind of badge that made even seasoned MPs hesitate without knowing why. She had flown in before dawn, stepping off a transport jet with the quiet precision of someone who never wasted a movement. No entourage, no fanfare, just a single directive sent from the Joint Interagency Oversight Office. Arrive. Observe. Do not announce authority unless necessary. And so she stood there now, leaning lightly against the wall, checking the time on the blacked-out display of her encrypted tablet, fully aware of the stares gathering like storm clouds around her. To them she looked like a civilian contractor, or maybe some analyst from a building they didn't care about. Too young, too quiet, too still. And in the military, silence is often mistaken for weakness. Down the hallway came the heavy stomp of boots, confident, rhythmic, unmistakably sure of their importance. Major General Ross Calder, 2 tours as a Navy SEAL, dozens of medals he never hesitated to mention, and a voice that carried like a grenade going off in a steel room. Calder was the kind of officer who demanded respect the way fire demands oxygen, loudly, fully, and without apology. He turned the corner with 2 aides trailing behind him, reviewing a briefing folder he hadn't bothered to read until he realized people were watching. Then his gaze found her, a woman barely pushing 30 standing directly beside the door he believed he owned. His smirk appeared instantly. "Excuse me," he barked, snapping his fingers. "The support staff meet downstairs. This hallway's for operational leadership." Leah didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even raise her eyes fully to meet his. She simply stepped half an inch to the right, making space for him to pass if he chose to. But to Calder, that quiet gesture was an insult. "Oh, don't tell me you're lost," he continued loudly, glancing around to make sure others heard him. "Intel babysitters are usually behind a desk somewhere, not clogging up my doorway." A few passing officers snickered, eager to be seen agreeing with the general. Leah offered no reaction. Her hands stayed loosely at her sides, one thumb tapping the corner of her encrypted case in a rhythm only she understood. Calder stepped closer, lowering his voice, but not the condescension. "Sweetheart," he said, leaning in as if granting her a favor. "This is a Tier 1 briefing. Not for interns, not for observers, and definitely not for whatever department you wandered out of." His aides laughed. The MPs at the end of the hallway exchanged amused looks. And still, Leah remained steady as stone. What no one knew, including Calder, was that she had already been scanned by the biometric panel inside the door. The system had flagged her clearance as above every uniformed officer in the building. It had even paused twice, verifying the signature because it was so rare to see her classification outside Washington. Leah Morgan, despite her age, wasn't just authorized to be there. She was the designated oversight authority for the operation they were all about to discuss. A role that ranked her, by law and interagency mandate, above every person wearing a uniform in that hallway, including the decorated general breathing down her neck. But she wasn't here for ego. She wasn't here to be saluted. She was here because, in 2 countries 7 time zones away, teams of operators were moving into position, and she was the only one in the building cleared to approve or reject the intelligence driving the mission. Calder, of course, knew none of this. He waved sharply at the nearby MPs. "Remove her from the secured area." One MP stepped forward hesitantly. "Sir, she has a black level badge." Calder rolled his eyes. "And I've got a gold level pension. It doesn't mean she belongs here." "Take it." The MP reluctantly approached. Leah calmly held out her badge, letting him take it from her hands. She knew exactly what would happen next. The MP scanned it. The scanner blinked red, not in denial, but in protest, like it wasn't meant to be handled this way. A high-pitched beep echoed down the hall. Calder snatched the badge and held it up to the light like an offended school principal. "Cute toy," he said, flicking it with his finger. "Did you print this in the basement of a contractor building?" The laughter grew louder now. A wave of amusement rolling over the hallway as Calder dropped her badge into the MP's palm like a piece of trash. Leah sighed very softly, disappointment, not fear, because she could already hear the echo of footsteps coming from the far elevator. 4 of them, perfectly synchronized. Not military boots. Federal. The sound cut through the hallway like a blade because everyone recognized it, even if they rarely heard it. Black suit transport officers. Couriers who only moved for one of 2 reasons: a national emergency or the arrival of someone whose clearance outranked theirs. Calder paused mid-smirk. His aides slowly turned. The MPs straightened. And then the 4 couriers stepped into the hallway, silver-edged cases in hand, earpieces glowing faintly. Without a moment's hesitation, without glancing at a single uniformed officer present, they walked straight toward the young woman Calder had just humiliated. "Director Morgan," the lead courier said, voice projecting across marble and metal. "The Joint Command is assembled and awaiting your arrival." The hallway froze. Calder blinked twice, confused. The officers who had laughed fell silent, so quickly it felt like oxygen had been sucked out of the air. Leah accepted the new encrypted badge the courier offered her, a badge far more advanced than the one Calder had mocked. As it unfolded, a flicker of digital ink revealed the classification that made every throat in the hallway go dry. Joint Interagency Oversight Director, rank of 40 equivalent, 2-star flag officer. And Calder? The man who'd spent the last 5 minutes mocking her as if she were beneath him? He looked like someone had pulled the floor out from under his boots. But this was only the beginning. The real reckoning, the one he would never forget, was still waiting behind that briefing room door. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout could have been. A thick, stunned stillness that wrapped the hallway in disbelief as Captain, no, Director. Leah Morgan stepped forward, retrieving her newly issued clearance badge with calm fingers. Calder's bravado cracked instantly, a hairline fracture splitting straight through the center of his authority as the couriers pivoted sharply, forming a protective corridor around her. Their synchronized movement was unmistakable. This was not courtesy. This was protocol reserved only for individuals whose decisions could suspend operations across entire theaters of war. Leah walked without hurry, the case in her hand reflecting the fluorescent lights above, her posture unaltered, not triumphant, not vindictive, simply composed, as though this unfolding humiliation wasn't about her at all, but about something much larger. Behind her, the officers who had laughed moments earlier straightened into rigid silence, unsure whether to salute, to apologize, or to hide. Calder's jaw clenched as he struggled to recover the collapsing structure of his ego. He stepped forward quickly, almost tripping over his own certainty. "Director, Morgan, there must be some mistake." His voice wavered, brittle. "This is a secure operations briefing. I wasn't informed of any outside oversight." Leah paused mid-step, turning to him with a level gaze so steady it felt like a slow exhale after a long-held breath. "General," she said softly, "that is precisely the problem." The words weren't sharp or accusatory. They didn't need to be. Truth rarely raises its voice. Calder opened his mouth again, searching for footing, for a fragment of dignity. "If I'd been told, if your office had communicated, my office did," she replied, her tone unchanged. 3 separate notifications. All marked urgent, all received by your staff. The courier to her right added, almost apologetically, "Delivery receipts confirmed, sir." Calder's aides blanched visibly. One took a tiny step backward, as if retreat alone might erase the evidence of negligence. The general inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring, but whatever retort he thought he had slipped away the moment the courier tapped the side of his earpiece, signaling the briefing room doors had been unlocked. Without ceremony, without a glance at Calder, the lead courier extended an arm toward the doorway. "Director Morgan, the Joint Command is assembled." Leah entered the room first. And in an instant, everything outside faded behind her as if the hallway, with all its mocking laughter and small minds, belonged to another world entirely. Inside, the atmosphere was entirely different, quiet, precise, an air so thick with gravity it felt like stepping into the eye of an operation in motion. Rows of high-ranking officers lined the long conference table, their uniforms weighed down with ribbons and metal. Three-star generals, admirals, and directors from agencies whose emblems were too classified to appear on public documents. Every head lifted when Leah crossed the threshold, and every one of those heads rose from their chairs. Not out of courtesy, not out of confusion, out of protocol. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs himself stepped forward and shook her hand. "Director Morgan," he said, "thank you for making the trip so quickly." Calder, who had attempted to slip inside behind her, froze mid-step as the chairman's eyes snapped sharply toward him. "General Calder," he said with a tone that was ice without being loud, "why are you entering this room?" The general swallowed hard. "Sir, I assumed I was needed. You were not informed that this briefing is classified above your operational tier?" The room went still, the kind of silence that precedes disciplinary earthquakes. Calder glanced at Leah, but she did not meet his eyes. She was already moving toward her place at the table, a seat reserved not at the side, not at the back, but near the center, flanked by two senior intelligence chiefs. "Sir," Calder stammered, "I wasn't aware Director Morgan would be leading oversight on this." "That," the chairman replied coldly, "is evident." A murmur of discomfort rippled through the room. Calder stood awkwardly at the door, shrinking in rank even as his medals gleamed desperately across his chest. The chairman gestured toward a seat in the corner. Not at the table, not even among the participants, just a lone chair against the wall. The implication was unmistakable. Observe, if allowed, but do not speak. Calder took the seat like a man walking into his own sentencing. Leah opened her encrypted case, revealing layers of documents, diagrams, sealed packets, and a device that projected classified intel directly onto the secure wall display. Without raising her voice, she began to walk the room through a detailed account of the operation unfolding overseas. A joint extraction with multiple allied nations, a risk level requiring full-spectrum oversight, and intelligence threads so delicate they required someone not just trained to handle them, but built for it. As she spoke, the shift became visible, not in her, but in them. The generals leaned forward. Admirals took notes. Agency directors nodded with the taut respect reserved only for those who command with precision. Leah explained intercept patterns, satellite timestamps, behavioral matrices, prediction arcs, all with the calm fluency of someone who had lived inside the data, someone who saw the battlefield not as geography, but as a moving language only she could translate. When she paused to let the room absorb the final projection, a map of the mission's critical window, the chairman looked at her with something bordering on pride. "Director Morgan," he said, "based on your assessment, do we have a green light?" Leah considered the question. Then, without hesitation, "Yes, sir. With a condition." She tapped the projection again. A detail blinked red. "General Calder's team is using outdated intel routes. If they advance on this path, they compromise the entire forward unit." Calder stiffened. "My team has trained for months on that route." The chairman turned sharply. "Did we ask for commentary?" Calder's mouth closed. Leah nodded toward the display. "This adjustment keeps the operation covert. If his group deviates, they risk exposing everyone, including themselves." The chairman didn't hesitate. "Then the adjustment stands. Director Morgan's authority on this operation is absolute." Calder felt the words like a blow. Absolute. The young woman he had mocked in the hallway now wielded command over the mission he believed he controlled. And the worst part wasn't the embarrassment. It was realizing she hadn't shown an ounce of satisfaction. No smirk. No revenge. Just calm, focused leadership. Because she hadn't come to win a power struggle. She'd come to prevent a disaster. When the briefing concluded and the officers rose to leave, each one paused to shake her hand. Calder remained seated, staring at the floor. He didn't look up until the chairman's final words echoed across the room. Quiet, but devastating. "General Calder, remain. The Inspector General will address your conduct." And as the door closed behind the last officer, the man who had once commanded platoons of elite soldiers finally understood something that should never have taken humiliation to learn. Respect is not owed to rank. It is owed to competence. and he had dismissed the most competent leader in the building. The door clicked shut behind the last departing officer, leaving the vast briefing room hollow and echoing, its polished table reflecting the fluorescent hum overhead. Calder sat in his solitary chair against the wall, shoulders squared out of instinct, but slumping under the weight of something heavier than rank. The realization that his authority, so carefully cultivated, so loudly projected, had cracked open like thin ice the moment truth walked past him. He did not look at Leah Morgan as she packed her encrypted case with meticulous efficiency. He did not trust himself to. She moved quietly, professionally, untouched by the spectacle that had unfolded outside those doors, as though her composure existed on a plane far above humiliation or triumph. Her presence was not boastful. It was disciplined. And that was perhaps the most devastating fact, the way she carried herself without ever needing to raise her voice or remind anyone who she was. Strength, when it is real, does not need to echo. The Inspector General entered without ceremony, a stack of folders under his arm and an expression that conveyed he had already read enough to know what needed to be done. Calder rose automatically, but the IG lifted a hand. Sit. The single command cut through the stillness. Calder lowered himself, jaw tight. Leah paused, watching only long enough to confirm her role in this portion was purely observational. The IG laid the folders on the table, flipping one open with a sigh heavy enough to age the air itself. General Calder, he began, your failure to acknowledge the presence of a senior oversight officer is concerning in itself. Calder swallowed hard, eyes fixed on a knot in the wooden table. But what I find more troubling, the IG continued, is the attempt to remove a cleared director from a secured zone. It demonstrates a lapse of protocol, judgment, and respect for interagency coordination. Calder did not defend himself. Even if he found words, none could climb out of the hole he had shoveled. The IG slid a signed notice across the table. Effective immediately, you are relieved of operational control for this mission and placed under review pending formal evaluation. Calder's breath hitched, not loudly, but in the small, defeated way of a man realizing that rank alone cannot shield him from consequence. He glanced up briefly, eyes flicking toward Leah, but she had already shifted her attention to her device again, offering him no expression, no judgment, only neutrality. And somehow, that was worse than anger. When the IG dismissed him, Calder stood slowly, his boots heavy against the floor as he crossed the room toward the exit. He paused at the threshold, pride and regret tangled like wire. Director Morgan, he said quietly. She looked up. His voice faltered. I misjudged. Leah nodded once. Not forgiveness. Not acceptance. Just acknowledgement. Correct it moving forward, she replied simply. No venom. No victory. Just truth. Calder nodded, understanding that this was the closest thing to an absolution she would offer. Then he stepped into the dim hallway, where officers who had once admired him now avoided his eyes, each one reminded that even giants can fall, especially when they build themselves on hollow ground. When he was gone, the room felt lighter, as though someone had finally exhaled. Leah finished securing her case and turned toward the chairman, who had remained quietly near the head of the table, observing everything with the steady patience of a man who had seen arrogance rise and crumble countless times before. He approached her with a faint, rare smile. You handled that with remarkable restraint. Leah shrugged lightly. The mission doesn't benefit from bruised egos, she said, including mine. The chairman nodded. Your father would have worded it differently, he chuckled. But he'd agree. At that, Lee's expression softened, just for a moment. She tapped the encrypted tablet, pulling up the final operational confirmation. The teams are in position. The window opens in 40 minutes. Then let's get to work, the chairman said. They exited the briefing room together, the couriers falling into formation behind them. As they moved down the hallway, every officer they passed stood at attention. Not because she required it, not because protocol demanded it, but because they finally understood exactly who she was, and how easily they could have overlooked her had truth not forced their eyes open. Some saluted sharply, others lowered their heads in silent apology. Leah acknowledged each gesture with the same steady grace, neither humbled nor inflated by the sudden wave of respect sweeping through the corridors. When they reached the operations command floor, a massive screen lit up with satellite feeds, encrypted maps, live tactical streams. The atmosphere vibrated with anticipation. Analysts and commanders glanced up as she entered, posture straightening like a tide shifting direction. The operations director stepped aside, allowing her direct access to the command interface. Not a word was exchanged. Her authority had already filled the room like a rising barometric pressure. Minutes later, the mission officially launched. Commands pulsed across networks. Operators moved into position, and the oversight that only Leah could provide shaped every decision. She stood at the center console, voice calm, movements precise, guiding the operation with a steadiness even seasoned officers admired. She worked quietly, not seeking credit, not noticing the glances of respect that flickered through the dim light. By the time the extraction succeeded, flawlessly, the entire command floor understood why she had been chosen. Why someone so young held authority that outranked generals. Why silence, in capable hands, is not weakness but mastery. When it was done, she exhaled softly, the weight of the crisis lifting from her shoulders. The chairman approached again. "You carried this," he said. "And you carried them." Leah closed the tablet. "We carried it together," she replied. It wasn't modesty, it was truth. Then she gathered her case and stepped toward the elevator, intent on disappearing the same way she had arrived, quietly, efficiently, without lingering in the glow of success. But as the door slid open, two junior officers waiting inside snapped to attention. "Director Morgan," one said, voice filled with the earnest respect of someone changed by what they had witnessed. "We hope you'll return to brief us again." She gave a small nod. "Focus on your work. Do that, and you won't need me." The doors closed. Later, long after she'd boarded her jet back to Washington, the base remained buzzing with the story, not of a young woman who embarrassed a general, but of a leader who walked in silently, commanded with clarity, and left without a trace of ego. A reminder whispered from corridor to corridor that respect is not worn on the shoulders, nor spoken with volume. It is earned in the quiet, in the steady, in the moments when someone stands in a room full of stars and shines brighter not because she is seen, but because she simply is.